This show is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for all your support in the production of this Career in STEM series.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Careers in STEM series. My name is Akul Gunukula and I'm a sophomore at Troy High School.
My name is Tanisha Panchal and I'm a junior at Troy High School.
We are FRC Team 226, the Hammerheads from Troy, Michigan, consisting of over 100 high school students from Troy and Athens High School.
We've been competing in the first robotics competition since 1999. This Career in STEM series is a bi-monthly show occurring on the first and third Thursdays of every month. During these episodes, we interview an individual working in the STEM field and learn about their experiences.
Also a reminder to put your questions in the chat and we'll answer them throughout the interview. Today our guest is Eddie Bachle. Eddie graduated from Albion College with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Physics, Chemistry, and Philosophy. He currently works at StockX as a platform engineer and tech lead. For this series, we'll have a 40-minute interview period, and we'll be answering questions from the chat periodically throughout the interview.
Awesome. So, Eddie, our first question for you is, what activities did you do in high school? And this could be either first robotics experience or any other clubs.
Yeah, so in high school, I was involved in the orchestra for 4 years. I also played club hockey out of Royal Oak throughout high school and significantly before that. And then I competed with 226 in the 08 and 09 seasons of the first robotics competition.
So, did you do any other sort of what sort of courses did you do in high school?
So I took a smattering of AP courses, chemistry sort of being one out of the science, BC Calc, AP US, AP World, AP Gov, and then a couple AP Lit and Language. And then other than that, sort of your standard smattering of general ed high school courses.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think these courses helped you determine ultimately what you wanted to do in the future?
You know, truth be told, I think that the biggest thing I appreciated sort of throughout high school was a really well-rounded education. It left me in a place where there were a lot of things that I was interested in, a lot of things that I could go and do. And when I was sort of getting ready to leave high school, apply to college, I knew I sort of enjoyed working with software, working with computers. It's a thing I did a lot in my free time and sort of around the school. I also participated in Web Club, actually, I guess. Forgot about that one. But that really sort of set me up where I had to make a choice. And I decided that I was going to pursue chemistry as sort of my undergraduate because I didn't want to do computers for money and like not enjoy it. If it sort of ruined my hobby, I would have been sad. So I decided that sort of for college, at least, I was going to try and pursue a chemistry education. That was the driver for me.
So what would you recommend students to do to find out more about jobs in interests that relate them, like chemistry for you? What did you do?
That was actually something that I probably should have done more of. I think that a really good question is like, where does a degree lead you? It took me really into my sophomore year of college where I asked one of my professors, it's like, all right, I'm going to graduate in 2 years with a bachelor's in chemistry. Where does that lead me? And her answer was, I mean, you can get a job in chemistry with a bachelor's, but most people are going to look, if you're looking at fairly serious chemistry, at pursuing a master's or PhD. And that was going to be 2 to 4 years worth of additional schooling, some time in the lab, some time as a research assistant, PhD, dissertation, and then potentially a postdoc. And it looked to be sort of like 8 more years of schooling. And at that point, I was sort of like, I was ready to do 2 more years and be done. And that really answered this question for me of like, one, the career path was starting to be something I fell out of love with, though incredibly interesting. And it sent me down a path of trying to find something else to do. So, yeah, I guess in short, my answer there is know where the degree takes you, because the degree is sort of 4 years and then it finishes. There are some degrees like going into medicine or dentistry or things or law where it clearly leads to a career path, but even that can be a sort of diverse career path. So have an idea of like what are the possibilities once you've graduated. It's because your life is 40 plus years of work post graduation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What can high schoolers do right now to kind of prepare for either a job in chemistry or philosophy?
Chemistry, I'll say that sort of getting as much of a chemistry education as you can, to where you walk into college really well prepared from like a math and sort of fundamental chemistry or fundamental physics standpoint, is super helpful. It's going to sort of mean that your first year is a lot smoother. You can spend that time getting acclimated to that sort of degree path and not trying to really catch on. So pay attention to sort of your high school chemistry and your high school math especially. For things in sort of like software engineering, because I will say I don't really identify as a computer scientist. I don't have any formal training in computer science. I'm really what would be closer to a software engineer. Is there's so much out there that you can do. Having a hobby project, having something that you work on the side, playing with some different technologies, and not even just the buzzword technologies, but getting some deep knowledge in something as sort of a project and building a little bit of a portfolio, that'll take you a long way. It'll make your sort of undergraduate education in computer science or software engineering easier. It'll give you a real idea if you're going to have fun doing this kind of thing. If the troubleshooting and debugging that is software engineering isn't fun for you when you're not under the gun, it's not going to be fun when you are under the gun.
So let's move on to your college years. So tell us about your major in college, and obviously you did multiple majors. So what was like the reasoning behind choosing those three in specific?
Yeah, so I guess I should partially correct that. So I have a major in chemistry and minors in physics and philosophy.
Okay.
I didn't quite have that much time or inclination to pursue a triple major. That would have been quite something. So with chemistry, I sort of, with good scores in AP Chem, walked into organic my freshman year, sort of went through organic chemistry, found that really interesting. That was a class in particular that really drove home, and they talk about it as a weeder class for med school curriculums in particular. It is not, it cannot be memorization based. Organic chemistry has millions, billions of different possible compounds. So you have to really learn the patterns that are associated with it. And that was sort of a studying hurdle and something that I had to learn at that point. What came next for me, so Albion College is a small liberal arts institution with a real focus on sort of academic rigor. And so Albion really pushes you to study outside of your field. I, as part of what was our modes and categories program, was expected to take classes in so they would associate a class with sort of a category, say gender or ethnic studies or environmental studies or global issues. So I actually had this real broad sort of set of classes, a lot of which I took out of the philosophy curriculum to fulfill those requirements, but they were really, really interesting. And so it sort of drove me both into physics and philosophy as sort of a consequence of having these broadening course experiences. And I think that they were really good for me as I sort of left college. I had a way broader knowledge than just my major field of study, which was something that I really enjoyed.
So while you were at Albion, what kind of activities did you participate in, or any kind of clubs?
So I didn't do quite as many clubs in undergrad. I actually, especially because the academic curriculum was fairly heavy, and I guess I'll talk to that in a minute. Like the couple of things that I significantly did was I played on the club hockey team, and I played on the sort of ultimate frisbee team. That was a looser group, and actually an interesting group is we would play at midnights on the quad, so we had a light up frisbee, and it was quite a bit of fun. What I did do outside of the classroom was I was able to do research with Dr. Vanessa McCaffrey, who was my academic advisor. And so Vanessa did research into organometallic compounds, which is sort of typically you don't mix organics and metallics, but when you do, you can get some really interesting like magnetism effects and things of that sort. So you can start to design like biomarkers or molecular magnets or things of that sort. So I had the opportunity as a relatively small college. So there were about 7 or 8 of us that worked in the lab with Vanessa, and had the ability to really hone a lot of my chemistry skills outside of the standard curriculum. So working with instruments that I wouldn't have normally had access to, learning techniques that were nowhere in the curriculum, and really digging deeper into sort of specific areas of chemistry. That was really definitely one of the more unique experiences that I had there. And then, and this is perhaps my sales pitch for small colleges, there's a lot of really interesting opportunities at small colleges like that. I ended up taking a couple of more unique, what we call January term classes. So these J-term classes were a quarter unit, 1 credit hour equivalent. And they would run outside of the standard curriculum. So I actually ended up going dog sledding for 5 days up in northern Canada. And it was a education and dog sledding, talking about sort of what happens when you remove the classroom from education and sort of shift the roles of educator and educatee, things of that sort. And then the other one was actually a leadership curriculum centered around the city of Detroit, where we spent a week down here after my sophomore fall. So there are a lot of really sort of interesting, even like I would call them co-curricular opportunities at a lot of colleges. Not necessarily a club or an organization, but maybe something that you can sneak into your curriculum, something perhaps not underwater basket weaving, but also perhaps really interesting.
So you mentioned that you did a research position at Albion, which was very interesting for chemistry. Did you do any other internships or co-ops or other research as well?
Yeah, so at the point that I had the conversation with my academic advisor and asked Vanessa sort of like, what does chemistry look like, and had this real epiphany of like, yeah, I don't think this is for me. I really decided not to shift my major at that point. And what I did was I found a position with the college IT department, and it was an interesting one. Our webmaster there had recently left. That role was being split amongst a number of people. And so they were looking for talented students to sort of participate, like students who have the aptitude for this kind of thing, to participate in helping to maintain the website. So I ended up doing everything from sort of like learning the basics of web server administration, installing upgrades, things that are a little out of style in sort of the modern software development era, but very common 10 years ago. And ended up really having this huge broad skill set. Started to learn how to develop software a lot more sophisticatedly, how to test software, how to install new off-the-shelf products that I wasn't familiar with. And I worked for the college IT department part-time during the school year, usually about 20 hours a week, and full-time in the summers up to about 40 for the next couple of years, which really led into like when I graduated, I was offered a full-time position and took a position there that sort of led me through a series of different roles for the next 6 years at the college.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So you mentioned that you did research with one of your professors. Do you have any advice for either high schoolers or undergraduate students on how to get research experience?
Truth be told, I will tell you to ask. Ask your professors what they're working on. Have conversations. I was in a place where I had already had conversations with Dr. McCaffrey before I showed up the first day. I had met her and spoke with her, sort of arranging my chemistry curriculum because it was going to be a little offset due to the AP courses when I was there for orientation in the summer. And so that relationship really continued into like she was teaching my organic class there, and I expressed interest, had conversations after class, and she says, hey, do you want to come into the lab and sort of like look at what we're doing and see if you're interested in that? So some of it is like building those relationships. It's for me at least, it was a long-term relationship. It was 4 years that I worked with her on different projects related to that, including things that sort of like were courses that helped me graduate eventually. It isn't, you don't have to necessarily stick with one professor. Oftentimes like professors will note your interest and be able to help you move between professors at different places in the department. I will say, and again, this is sort of my pitch for small colleges, a lot of larger colleges, these opportunities are exposed to graduate students, master's students, PhD students. Undergraduate research is not as thoroughly fleshed out at large colleges in some cases. So if that's a thing that you're really interested in, and that sort of like academic aspect of it, One of the things I will, and I used to tell students this at Albion, sort of when they would work for me in the IT department, is you can always go to a big school for advanced study. Oftentimes, those are actually tighter experiences going to large schools for advanced study. And this is my opinion, so I take it with a grain of salt and consider what you're looking for. But there's definitely sort of value in looking at different types of education, what's available there. And I know this sort of student research is available. There are a number of small colleges throughout the state of Michigan and throughout the country that are really specialized in providing those opportunities for students.
So how you're involved with FIRST quite a bit, especially on our team. How have you stayed in touch with FIRST through after high school and in college as well?
Yeah, I will say that one of the really sort of fun things was continuing to remain in touch with FIRST. So if we talk about something like the Troy FRC district, that is actually a little bit of an alumni gathering. A number of us volunteer with the competition, and a number of us come back on sort of Saturday, either to help clean up or to gather afterwards. So one of the nice things is that, and this is true of people across other teams as well, like it is a sort of commonplace for people who think in a similar way, FIRST alumni, to gather. You'll meet a lot of people who sort of like you have been around throughout the years when you come back and volunteer at these things, and that can be sort of really a nice perk to doing it. I had somebody, I was talking to one of the FTAs at a competition once, and I think what we sort of discussed was that it is incredibly rewarding to volunteer for FIRST. The like level of enthusiasm, the level of competition is incredibly high and has improved year after year. And the social impact is really pretty inspiring. I mean, that's sort of what FIRST talks towards is helping people develop skills for life, whether it's sort of technical and robotics oriented or leadership oriented. Watching that grow is one of the things that I really like with volunteering. And so that's what leads me to volunteer with 226 for FLL for Shark Fest, as the judge advisor, as the field manager for our FTC tournaments, and then either as an event coordinator or a field supervisor for the FRC tournaments. It's really something that drives me to come back and volunteer year after year.
I also had another question about your FIRST experience. I know that you mentioned that the experience that you've had by mentoring FLL teams has been really great. But is there any other way that you still stay connected with FIRST? Why did you essentially decide to come back and stay involved in the FIRST field?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm doing right now, which is actually sort of interesting, is FIRST in Michigan was really interested in providing sort of additional opportunities for students in lieu of the lack of in-person competition in 2021. So there's a group of us right now that are working on like a video game version of Infinite Recharge. So that's something that we're currently sort of actively working on it and actually actively seeking volunteers. So if this is a thing that people are interested in, my LinkedIn is in the description here. Feel free to get a hold of me. But our goal is to have that be something that's available this coming summer for people to play with and potentially hold some amount of tournament play. So that's been sort of a fun thing. In the long run, I think the thing that pulls me back is really seeing the excitement that's around FIRST. So I worked, or at least when we were still in the office, downtown in Detroit, and so Worlds is down at Kobo, or now what is the TCF Center, and I would take people from work and bring them down there, and just seeing like the level of wow, like high school students actually compete at this level, are engaged, and especially like it's one thing to watch the tournament, which is incredible, and like that's sort of first thing is like the game will suck you in. But as we went into the pits and talk to teams, the stories that you students can tell around what you built, why you built it, how it influences you, that's really the thing that continues to sucker me in year after year is that experience of working with students.
So without giving away too much on this new game that you're developing, could you just explain a little bit of what someone, if I was, I'm interested. So I want to know what would someone that contacts you be expected to do or apply for, and what is the game possibly about?
Yeah, so the game is actually going to look exactly like the Infinite Recharge field. So what I've seen in single player at this point is like it looks. So I was the field soup at Macomb last year, week one. It looks true to life to what week one competition looked like. So it is the actual Infinite Recharge game. There's going to be some additional sort of skills challenge elements and sort of practice elements. That's sort of the core of what we're building. And so what we're looking for, the game is built in Unity, which is not necessarily the part that I'm working on, but is a part that we do need some help with. So the game is built in Unity. It's going to involve sort of a multiplayer networking engine, and then some amount of lobby making where teams can join up to play against each other. The one sort of unique part of this, and what we're really driving towards, is that teams will actually upload their robot code. So you are going to play with your own robot code, and that's really where this becomes a unique and distinct challenge. Is that you're going to program as though you're programming for the robot, and then drive a virtual robot around with your choice of components, shooters, drivetrains, things of that sort. That's really where we're heading.
Yeah, that sounds really great. So now moving on to kind of like your professional life after college, can you talk a little bit more about the company that you work in and what exactly you do as a platform engineer?
Yeah, so StockX is a two-sided marketplace. We're really endeavoring to sort of build a new form of e-commerce that's centered both around really this concept of what we call current culture goods. So things that are around sort of self-expression. There's an amount of fashion or sort of lack of availability. So our main market that we're known for is luxury sneakers. Though we do a unique trade in sort of streetwear and recently electronics, sort of both vintage and modern. So electronics, collectibles, things of that sort. So you could pick up a PS5 if it wasn't available, which is one of our more controversial items. But you could also pick up an old SNES or a Lego Millennium Falcon set or something of that sort. There's a bunch of stuff that sells on the site in addition to sneakers and streetwear, which have been historically our primary verticals. What I do at StockX is I sort of work with the team that really focuses on keeping the site performing well, and helping other engineers build new features for the org. So what platform engineering is a subset of software engineering, typically focused on not like building new buttons onto the site or anything of that sort, but making sure that the site is highly performant. So whenever you ask for a web page, you get it back in a timely fashion. No errors. If there are errors, that we know about them as soon as the customer sees it. And then also building tooling. So we have a group of about 250 software engineers, I would guess at this point, that work for the company as a whole. And there needs to be a team to help build software that makes building other software easier. And that's really our focus, is this sort of enablement and force multiplying role where we build tools. So to put that sort of in a tangible sense, we need, say, a new service to do Alipay payouts in China. If you're going to, or Alipay payment. So if you want to buy something with Alipay in China, we're going to spin up a new service to do this. As the company has grown, it turns out that takes longer to do. There's a lot more components to it. So we estimated that in Q4 of last year, it took almost 14 days to spin up a new service. And that's a really, really long time. So our goal was to bring that down to 30 minutes. And so we built a bunch of technology to drop that sort of new service time down to 30 minutes. And we continue to sort of look for optimizations of that sort. That's where, I guess I would say that's where the team wants to be working. On the other hand is sort of the what happens when things go wrong. So if you have a database fail, or you have Amazon have an outage in their region, or we ship some bad code, it does happen. Things get past our tests on occasion. My team is often one of the ones that is sort of centrally involved in figuring out what went wrong, how do we fix it, how do we communicate both to internal stakeholders and the customer, how soon it's going to be fixed. And then how do we ensure that it doesn't happen again? The sort of doesn't happen again bit is a really significant part of what I'm involved in, working with teams. Because oftentimes somebody else's component has failed and I will like talk them through how to find it and fix it. But then my real role comes into helping them ensure that it doesn't ever happen again.
So you talked about that you're a software engineer. Obviously, your degree doesn't exactly translate to it. Obviously, you had your first experience, first job as a web developer, helping with the website at Albion. How did your lack of a computer science background, specifically like a degree, help you or kind of detriment you in a sense?
It definitely it means that when I do have to develop software, it's a skill that I've had to build over the years, sort of in my personal time. I don't write a ton of software from scratch. My specialty is understanding existing software and how multiple systems work together. So while sort of a lot of small companies start with one system, what one would call like a monolith, as companies grow, someone like Amazon has thousands of different systems that all work independently. And my specialty is really in helping wire these things together and helping glue those bits together. So while I don't have sort of the classic computer science education to build sort of new things, there's a real space in software for making sure that we run software well. So platform engineering is a relatively new field. It sprung up out of like infrastructure engineering, which was where I started, working with databases, working with web servers, things of that sort. So it is possible to sort of really organically grow into a role at a company. And that was sort of my advancement. Was I started doing one thing, somebody said, hey, can you do another thing? And I said, hey, yeah, sure. And that's that classic like liberal arts learning to think. And some of it is, especially in a faster moving world that we live in, where skill sets and careers are unlikely to last for 40 years. The fearlessness to learn something new is almost a like order of magnitude more valuable skill than having a concrete knowledge of a programming language or a web server software or anything of that sort. The programming languages I used even 5 years ago, or the servers that I worked with back then, I don't use those anymore. Those have sort of fallen out of the industry, and I use things that are more recent. I've had to adapt to those. So I would say that the adaptiveness that is sort of moving from a degree that is unrelated to a new field and then sort of continuing to evolve within that field, that was something that I think started early for me and it has stuck in the intervening years.
So when you moved jobs from Albion to StockX, how did the StockX interviewing process work? And did they mostly look at your experience in software, or did they kind of consider your degree and background?
So there's a couple of pieces there. One of which is I was referred to the job at StockX by another 226 alumni. So Christian Emmer, who was a mentor for the team for many years, will actually, I think, at some point make a showing on this Careers in STEM series. It is my friend from high school. He's actually currently my roommate as well. So he says, hey, do you want a job? Do you want to come move back to Detroit? And I said, yeah, sure. So I will say that like a referral from a friend or a referral from a colleague or a referral from an academic advisor, those go a long way to sort of helping advance a career. My resume looks unorthodox. And so that introduction allowed me to have a conversation with our, at that time, Vice President of Software Engineering, Jeremy Walker. Jeremy interviews me and was really able to sort of, through a series of questions, suss out that my background was compatible with one of the roles that StockX needed to fill, and that I had sort of the adaptable thinking. Like I did an interview today for a candidate, and that candidate didn't have a traditional educational background. He came through the military and then spent time sort of rising up through technical ranks. But in the conversation, I was able to see that he displayed technical mastery and the ability to work in a team, the ability to work remotely, things of those sort was really what I was looking for. And what I think was in some ways what Jeremy was looking for when he interviewed me. Now, I did have an on-site interview, so I interviewed with a couple of the people who would be my colleagues, and eventually one of them would be my boss for a while, and talked through different of sort of my technical experiences. A lot of it is scenario-based questioning, sort of at that point. We at StockX now have a series of more structured questions that we asked, and then they allow us to dig into people's skill sets. We ask you to solve a problem, and then we ask you, hey, why'd you solve it this way? And then we'd say, hey, if I change this problem a little, does this change your answer or solution to it? So that is a fairly common interviewing method for software engineering, but wasn't necessarily my experience at StockX.
This is just kind of what we talked about earlier, but I really liked what you said about the passion to learn. But going off of that, can you explain or can you walk us through what a typical working day would look like for you, whether that be in person or online?
Yeah. So I guess I'll do this in sort of like a weird order. It's not going to be chronological. My team meets most days of the week to catch up, especially in a remote world. We do use that time to solve problems, but we also often use that time to socialize to some degree. For us, building a tight team culture with a strong mission, we all sort of enjoy working with each other. That's one of the reasons people stay places. So I look at, and this will be a little tangential, but I look at three major motivators for really good software engineers. The first is mission. Why are you building what you are building? Do you believe in it? Does it make sense? Can you articulate it? The next is team. So like my team is amazing. Team is one of the things that will keep me at StockX for years to come. I work with a great group of people. And the last one is tactical challenge. It's the thing that you're working on, challenging, interesting, and stimulating. And those three are often something that will keep somebody at a company. Because I would tell you that the fourth and no lower than fourth is compensation. You have to compensate people fairly, and that's important. But what holds people from chasing a couple of dollars here or there is the group of people that they work with and the problems they're solving. So having that meeting once a day to really ensure that we have a tight relationship with our team, I think that's really important. And then it depends. Some days I have 6-7 hours free of meetings, and I really work on solving our sort of next big challenge. StockX has grown almost 10x in our number of daily sales in the 3 years that I've been there. It's grown fairly significantly. So we have scaling challenges. So we're often looking at what's going to be our next stumbling block or what's going to be our next opportunity to go faster. And so some days I have a whole lot of hours to work on that. Other days I have a lot more meetings. And these meetings are often either to work on architecting large projects, working across multiple different teams. We've got one right now that's between sort of our identity team and our edge team that controls our API, looking at how we do authentication and authorization so that you only have access to exactly the things that we need in a sort of more modern and sophisticated way. And then the other sort of major component is I spend a lot of time pairing. So pairing is something really common in software engineering where two people work on a problem together. It's definitely like, for a long time, sort of computer scientists and the IT guys got this reputation of being the guy that you threw the Cheeto over the wall to and then out comes code. That's not really how modern software engineering works. It is very, very collaborative. So I often spend significant portions of my day working with other software engineers around the organization to solve problems together. I have things that I'm really specialized knowledge in, other people have theirs, and combining that together can be really effective. The other thing we do to support that is we've been working on sort of like an internal training curriculum. So I teach a curriculum called Kubernetes 101, Kubernetes being a really common container hosting platform for running servers, essentially. So I spend a decent amount of time helping people learn around the org as well.
So you mentioned compensation. So how did you go about salary negotiations when you moved from Albion to StockX? Oh, you're not Albion.
So I will say that salary negotiations is a challenging field. You want to ensure that you're compensated fairly. That was sort of towards compensation being fourth. It's like you have to compensate people fairly. To ensure you're compensated fairly, know what the positions you're interested in are paying and how that correlates with experience. This is a particularly challenging one. I stayed at Albion for 6 years, and it was really when I moved jobs internally that I got to renegotiate my salary. It is a challenge to stay somewhere and stay salary competitive. I will say one of the interesting things, Albion is what I would call like education or nonprofit or things of that sort. There is a unique difference in how nonprofit does salary as compared to for-profit or public sector or private sector. a nonprofit or an education institution tend to have lower salary but really, really good benefits. And that actually can be really useful in different ways. If you're somebody who's looking at having kids, the idea of your student or your children being able to go to college for free, which is often a benefit, can be really advantageous. College is expensive, as I think many of you are probably finding out. When I moved sectors, something that I had to be conscious of was I was going to lose a lot of my really, really nice benefits, and I had to make up for that in cash compensation. So that's something to bear in mind as you sort of switch industries, is that sometimes the way that you're even paid for things may be different. So trying to match salary across industries isn't always the best way to go about it.
Yeah, those are really good points. And what goals do you have for your future in this career?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I actually recently got a promotion to tech lead, which I was very excited about. Tech lead oftentimes is a role, not a title, but StockX does use it as a title. So there's a couple more notches in the what's called individual contributor space. So if I'm to say a software engineer that like makes software on a daily basis, there's typically a role called a staff engineer and a role called a principal engineer. And if you're a big place like Microsoft or Google, they have their fellows or their distinguished fellows. And those are usually one or two people at the company who are sort of the top engineer. For my part, I sort of am at a point in my career where I get to make a choice. I can either, and it is not a one and done choice. I should caveat. I can either continue up the individual contributor ladder, looking to hone my skills, hone my craft, become a staff engineer, and sort of really lead from a technical standpoint, or I can choose to pivot towards a people leadership role, something like being an engineering manager or director or vice president is sort of things in the next 20, 30 years, potentially on my horizon. I do think that one of the things that I discovered is I liked working at a smaller company like a startup. They're scrappy, they're fairly willing to try new things. You don't end up just sort of as a widget maker in one small corner of the company. And I really did enjoy that. So I think that I may be involved in that. Related to compensation previously, actually, as well, something to bear in mind if you're working in startups is that equity plays a role there. Like my cash compensation was lower, but I own a stake in StockX, and that has a worth to it. I'll be able to sell that as the company goes public, or potentially before the company goes public, depending on what's available. So yeah, for me, career-wise, I don't necessarily know. I spend a decent amount of time working in sort of like people leadership and teaching and team organization. I was a team lead essentially at different points in my time at Albion. I've performed as a team lead at StockX, but it was never a permanent role. I could choose to make that a permanent role, or I could sort of continue on that high technical track, which I think is where I'm leaning at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds great. Is there specific development or upcoming technology that maybe you're excited to hear about?
I would say for folks in high school, my advice would be to become familiar with containers. So Docker is sort of your primary word when you hear containers. It's used to run web servers. It actually, thinking back to the video game, when you send us your robot code to play as part of that, we're going to compile that into a Docker container. And this is a way of deploying code that runs in a really highly efficient fashion. So I think that's really one of the big things. More towards sort of the bleeding edge tech that I work with, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in a space called cloud development kits. So oftentimes you need software to run on infrastructure. It used to be that you would call the sysadmin, you'd wait 2 to 4 weeks, they'd go buy a server, and then you get infrastructure because they'd plug it in and configure it for you. Well, now we exist in a world a handful of years later where companies like Amazon and Microsoft through the Azure product, Google Cloud Platform, offer infrastructure as a commodity. I type 2 commands in, wait 10 minutes, and I have a database. It's not, we're a long way away from weeks to do that. And so some of the more advanced technologies there are things like cloud development kits where I actually declare the infrastructure I want as a piece of code, and it shows up and it's just sort of there. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in that space. I also think that increasingly cybersecurity is going to get to become a big deal. This is sort of an interesting tie back to some of my undergraduate, but there were some individuals that came in to talk about cybersecurity as part of the math department at Albion, and they talked about it in terms of economics. The people who have a security breach are the people who are easiest to breach. Like if it's a nation state actor, they're going to get you no matter what. But if it's some hacker trolling for money, whoever is cheapest to breach is the most money for them, and is the most profitable. So helping companies to improve their cybersecurity posture to where they're not a target is going to be a real expanding industry, especially as everything gets more connected. I think about this stuff in terms of like everything's connected. At one point, there was a Amazon technology called Kinesis that failed about 4 months ago, and people's vacuums quit working. Like their Roomba wouldn't work anymore because an interconnected piece of software started to fail. So making sure that software is secure, is durable, things of that sort, that's stuff that I'm really interested in, sort of a platform engineering topic. And you see people around sort of the technology space talking about it. There's a woman by the name of Tanya Riley, who was an early Google engineer, formed their site reliability engineering group, and she now works for Squarespace. But she gives a talk on building fireproof software through the context, and this is where you tie into history, in the context of the New York City Fire Code. So if anybody read Ashes of Roses, which I know is a book that got passed around on occasion in sort of middle school, she talks about how we only learn to build better things, like in terms of fire codes, when people die. I don't want to live in a world where people have to die for us to write better, safer software, because bad software causes the Boeing 737 MAX to crash, things of that sort. So those are some of the things that I'm interested in for the future, is really building good, durable software.
Speaking of technology with your company, do you guys use blockchain technology? And if so, could you give a brief explanation on it? Obviously, it's a big topic, yeah.
We do not, though we are vaguely starting to talk about like non-fungible tokens. NFTs is something that you could trade in a stock market of things, in a sort of e-commerce for current culture goods. One of the biggest challenges with blockchain as a formal technology, but not with all crypto technologies, is it's slow. You can only mine so many Bitcoins on the chain per time interval. And so a lot of blockchain technologies have really interesting applications for things like, say, property ownership. So take, for example, the country of India doesn't have very strong notions of sort of like, it's hard to track who owns a parcel of land or property, especially if you get out of like the cities. And so the courts are often overwhelmed with property disputes. So they start looking to things like blockchain that ensure line of custody to start to solve some of these problems. So I think it has really interesting applications with things that move relatively slowly, things like property ownership or media generation or things of that sort. But something that's as high traffic as like StockX is would really struggle with a blockchain technology because of the speed in which new links can be like done on the chain. At least Bitcoin has that problem. This isn't necessarily something I'm super well versed in, but that's sort of one of the problems that I see with it.
Okay. My question, it's a little bit backtracking back onto your college experience, but say that there is a student who might be in the same situation as you, who realize that they may not want to pursue a scientific career, or may want to move on to an engineering background. Mm-hmm. What is the best way for them to approach that situation?
Mm-hmm. For me, at least, I had a choice. Was I going to try and transfer into computer science, or was I going to sort of finish out my degree and look for it professionally? So I think I would sort of evaluate how far you are into your college experience, how many years you can afford to stay, because college costs money. If you can't afford to finish your degree, switching degree programs, that might not be the right choice. I know a lot of people who, especially in software engineering, started working part or full-time during undergrad to help them make that sort of transition into the working world. I think that's really sort of this question, is like, can you get to where you want to transition with your degree, or do you need a different degree? And then can you start to gain the experience while you're still pursuing your degree if you're going to make a pivot immediately out of undergrad? I will say that like I went to school with a number of people who had English majors and went into law. I went to school with people who have English majors and went into medicine. The major on your on your document need not dictate where you go. It can shut doors, so that is a thing that I should be careful about. I have a dear colleague who was looking for a first job out of Albion, actually, and somebody looked at his resume and said, "Well, you have a bachelor's of arts in computer science, not a bachelor's of science," and we're sort of almost going to pass on it. Now, this is where relationships become important. He was talking about that to one of the computer science professors at Albion, who wrote him a recommendation letter, broke down every class in the curriculum, and showed how it was more courses towards the IEEE like standard computer science major than the University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, Harvard. He did all of these comparisons. And I think it was that letter that really helped my friend Alex acquire that position. So while a degree on paper may matter to some degree, if you supplement it with other things, that's really going to be what seals the deal in sort of any job search, I would say.
So you mentioned their IEEE. What is that exactly? Could you explain?
It is the International Electrical Engineers something, I think, is that acronym. But it's essentially like sort of one of the international organizations that does standards for electrical and computer science engineering, things of that sort. It's a fairly large international body. Oh, and the chat says International or Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, I think was what I saw pop by there. So yeah, they certify a lot of degree programs. They have standards for like different plugs, voltage standards. They're a large standards body out in the world.
Yeah, that all sounds great. So just to kind of one of the last few questions that we have for you, what advice do you have on college or career planning?
I would offer the advice that sort of nothing's final. I think that like if you don't get into the first college of your choice, there are tons and tons of good colleges. If your major doesn't turn out to be what you were hoping it was, change majors, change colleges, transfer somewhere else. Don't lock yourself into any given path, because in the long run, it'll rob you of opportunities to do more interesting things. And then the other part, I guess, is pay attention to the people around you. I have good friends from Albion, from StockX, people who have left StockX and gone to other companies. And these are the people who are my professional network for years and years to come. These are people who I will likely work with again. So build those relationships and don't burn bridges, sort of regardless of what you do. It's incredibly valuable to have those relationships. It's what has gotten me jobs. It's what's gotten friends jobs. And that is one of, more than anything that you can put on paper, is when somebody says, yeah, this person knows what they're doing, they're strong, I would choose to work with them again. Those relationships are so valuable.
All right, I think we have one more question. Is there any other information or advice you'd like to share with the audience today?
I would say I would offer this, like, whatever you're doing, make sure you have fun doing it. I volunteer because it's fun for me. I work on the things that I do because it's fun for me. If it's no longer fun for me or I'm no longer challenged, I'm probably seeking additional opportunities. So really be conscious that you have joy in the things that you're doing, and keep a really close eye on that. For me, like continuing to learn, continuing to develop new skills, that's what brings me joy. And so in a professional sense and in a personal sense, that's something that I really chase. My other bit, and perhaps this is me thinking currently, it's a really easy, especially if you work in a software field in a highly connected world, to work yourself to death. Be conscious of burnout, especially in undergrad. I've noticed this trend recently with younger people who join the company. I think we in high school and college get used to, there's a semester, I'm just going to rush to the end of the semester, and then it'll be all over. Well, that's not the case with work. You still show up the next Monday. So develop a healthy cadence. Know that you have things sort of outside of work. And in undergrad too, like have side hobbies, have things you do other than constantly working. Really focus on things that help you recharge, things that are fun, because that's going to be essential sort of throughout your career, throughout your life.
We thank you so much for being a helpful mentor on the team and obviously helping us organize a lot of these events. And we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And make sure to come back in 2 weeks on April 9th or April 15th for our next show. And that's all we have for everyone. Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you both for having me.